Welcome to Behind the Build. I am your host, Jonathan Jacobs, and I'm excited today that I have Michael Taylor from Taylor Smyth with me. He has been involved in his practice for how many years now?
I first started practice in 1994, actually, in my previous incarnation at a previous company that I started.
Okay, so practicing now for 30 years.
It's a really scary thing to hear, but it's true. I don't know where the time went.
Right? I realize the same thing. Same thing with me. I've been in my company 7 years, not 30. So in 30 years, I feel like there's a lot to be able to unpack and discover about the journey that you've had. So I would take it from here. I'm curious to know, if we go back kind of the beginning of your journey in architecture, did you grow up in Toronto?
No, I'm an ex-American.
Okay.
Although my father grew up in Toronto, so he was Canadian. But I grew up in the States mostly.
Yeah.
In Chicago.
Okay.
But I went to high school in England.
Oh, interesting.
And that's really where my interest in architecture started, is being, in a place with a lot of old architecture, great architecture. My parents would take us to the continent, and we'd travel around and go to Italy and Greece and, all those different places. And I just started really developing a real interest in architecture because of that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, you're in Europe. There's an endless amount of different streams of and styles of architecture. So was there a certain architecture you found that really connected with you when you were there?
I just was fascinated by it all.
Okay.
And actually, before I just figured out that I wanted to be an architect, I originally wanted to be an archeologist.
Oh.
And so I was, I loved going to the ancient ruins in Rome and just imagining. And I read all these books that my parents used to buy me about Schliemann discovering Troy, and there was a book called Gods, Graves, and Scholars that I remember about all these excavations of ancient civilizations. And I don't know what it was about it. I just sort of ate it up, and so of course got to visit all these places.
Right.
But I think eventually I just decided that rather than digging up the old stuff, I should be building the new stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So were you really tactile as a youngster? Were you out there digging up in the backyard?
Wasn't doing any digging, no,
Okay.
but I was always drawing and coloring and making, abstract designs and all of that. So I really had an artistic bent from a really early age.
And were you taking any form of schooling on how to draw and what to draw?
No,
Okay.
I just did it on my own.
Just passion.
Yeah, it was just a passion. Yeah.
Okay. And so when you applied for university or for college at the time, were you applying for architecture or were you applying for archaeology?
Well, so it's really hard to know what you really want
Yeah.
to do when you're first going to school. So I just went to a really great liberal arts university, University of Chicago,
Okay.
where you really got to study a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
And at that point, I think the dream of being an architect had kind of fallen away for me, because I really never had any exposure to it. I didn't know what you could do to pursue it, and I didn't know about applying for schools or anything like that.
Right.
So after a couple of years of just getting this great education, I suddenly thought to myself, okay, wait, what am I going to do? And so, these things are so fortuitous. I went to a career counselor, and I said, I'm not sure what I should be doing. And she looked at me, she said, well, if you could be anything, what would you be? And I said, well, I'd either be an actor or an architect. It just came out to me like that, because I dabbled in school plays and all of that.
Yeah.
But truth be told, I was really a bad, terrible actor.
I was going to say, are we going to
No,
carry a note?
No. I was always the spear carrier in the back.
Okay, fair.
Which was fine. So she said, well, if you're interested in architecture, Harvard offers a summer program. It's a 6-week program. It's called the Career Discovery Program. And it attracts all different people, from people, trying to figure out what they want to do,
Mm-hmm.
to older people looking to make a change. And so I applied for it, and I got in, and spent 6 weeks in Cambridge taking this course. And I just knew, this is it. This is what I want to do. And so I immediately decided I gotta, figure out how I'm gonna apply. And I went through the process and applied, and was very fortunate to get into Harvard actually, to study architecture in their master's program.
And what a campus to be at,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
right? What an inspirational campus.
Oh yeah.
It
Absolutely.
is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, and the GSD, the Graduate School of Design, was also an amazing building. It was built by, okay, I'm going to say John Andrews, although I have a feeling that might be not right. But and it's a great series so it's an open space with a whole series of what they call trays, and so it just terraces down under one great roof. And so when you were in that building,
Yeah.
you were part of this community of people, and there was this incredible energy, and people would be up half the night working, and suddenly it would erupt into a party, and people would start jumping around and playing music, and then everyone would go back to work. So it was really, really an exciting place to be.
How many students would have been going through that program in a given year?
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't remember.
Okay. Like,
Yeah.
I was wondering, it's a couple hundred, is it 50, is it 100?
Yeah, there were probably 50 per year, maybe.
50 per year.
Yeah, not
okay.
a massive
Yeah.
class.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine. I mean, in general, most of them are relatively small cohorts, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And so you finished your, was it your undergrad?
No, that was
It
master's.
was a master's. Sorry.
Yeah,
Master's
I had
program.
undergrad from the University of Chicago,
Thank you.
then
Okay.
got my master's. Went straight through
Okay.
from undergrad to doing my master's.
And so where did you land your first job?
So again, everything's fortuitous about who you meet at the right time and where you are. So Harvard, the Graduate School of Design had a program where they would invite architects from different parts of the U.S., Canada, all of that, to come and teach a studio. And they would come for maybe 2 days a week and do crits and all of that. And so I ended up taking a studio by Barton Myers. And Barton Myers, for those people who don't recall, was originally partners with Jack Diamond. It was Diamond Myers, and they had recently actually separated into two different firms. But Barton taught a studio, and we really got along. And so when I finished school, I was sort of going, okay, where do I want to live? And I put some feelers out in Boston and in Chicago and New York. And this was 1983. So that was actually one of the recessions, and there wasn't a lot of work going on.
Right.
So I sent Barton a letter, and I said, hey, would you be interested in hiring me? And he sent me back a letter and said, yeah, come on up. And because I had at that point dual Canadian American citizenship because of my parents, I just literally just jumped on a plane and came up and started working for him. And that was it.
You know how many people I've spoken to that have been now either in some way connected to Jack Diamond? So many people.
And Barton.
And yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the history is that Barton Myers had 4 associates, and that was Kuwabara, Payne, McKenna, and Bloomberg. And so, of course, many people have come then through KPMB, which formed in 1987 after Barton sort of left and moved to LA to pursue his practice there.
Interesting. So much history that I have to learn about all of this as I interview more and more people. There's just the amount of the number of people that have got their training from some of these incredible figures that were really well established back in the 70s and the 80s. But then also like the reach that they had as they all kind of individually went on their own and opened practices in different parts of North America, leading to what you're doing now. So at what point do you venture out on your own? How long are you there, and what did that look like?
So from being at Barton's from 83 to 87, and Barton had then left and sort of sold his practice to KPMB. So I literally left Barton Myers Associates one evening, and the next day came into work, and it was Kuwabara, Payne, McKenna, Bloomberg Architects. And so I worked with them until 1994.
Okay.
And at that point, set out with David Ponarini and Zimak Hariri, and we formed a company called Taylor Hariri Ponarini Architects. And so that was sort of the genesis of that practice. Then in 2000, I decided to move on and
Yep.
formed a new partnership, which is Taylor Smyth Architects.
Amazing.
And here we are quite a few years later.
Yeah. You said it was 2000, so you're 14 years now into, or 24 years.
24
My math
years.
is terrible.
Yeah, yeah.
24 years into the current practice.
Yeah.
And that's, again, so these multiple moves you've established at different stages of your career, your interest and intent in different forms of architecture. So I know now you're focusing, I think, more on residential. Is that correct?
I am personally focusing more on the residential
Right.
work, but I mean, in the past, as part of Taylor Smyth Architects, I've worked on schools and community centers and commercial buildings and office interiors. There's not much work these days in office interiors,
Right.
so I've done quite a range. But yeah, I've started to really sort of focus a bit more on the residential lately.
And why is that? Because I say that because you've, and I know you've done all these other things. I know that your practice still focuses a lot on the commercial
Mm-hmm.
and multi-res institutional work. I know that exists.
Mm-hmm.
You specifically,
Yeah.
why residential?
I think it's because it allows me to focus on the craft of architecture more.
Mm-hmm.
The development of the nuances of making great architecture. And while, of course, you can still do that with the institutional and public projects, it's a lot more difficult to do. And so I've just really enjoyed. But I'm also I consider myself an interior designer. I don't have a degree in interior design, but it's part of my passion. I don't know how to separate the exterior and the interior of the buildings. And so the residential work just allows me to really work with beautiful materials and natural materials and just go to a high level of detail, and also to work with great builders and craftsmen. With the institutional projects, sometimes it's not so easy just to get to do that, just because of the nature of the types of contracts and trades that you get to work with.
And at what stage, when you started the current practice of Taylor Smyth, did you start to take on the variation of work? So, because when you're starting out again on your own, I know you had done it previously, but again, your new partnership, you're reestablishing the brand in some way, right?
Yeah, but I brought projects along.
You did, okay.
From the previous practice. Yeah, okay. So I had some ongoing projects. The first a house that I did from scratch was sort of we were in the middle of,
okay.
And it's still one of my best houses. I'm really proud of that one. And then was working with the Toronto District School Board on projects and things like that. So it wasn't starting from scratch by any means.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
And so you move into this. So when do you start establishing the requirement for bringing in a staff to help support the projects that you have? Is it immediate? You say, we got to bring in some junior level people to help work on drafting. What does that look like for you?
So in making the transition from
in 2000.
Yeah. So the other story is that Robert Smyth was an associate at the Taylor Smyth Architects. So
okay.
I asked him to join me as a partner.
Okay.
Because we worked really well together, and I had great respect for him, and he's smart and talented and all those things.
Yeah.
And so there were the two of us, and then we invited one other staff member to come and work with us as well.
Okay.
And then we very quickly hired two more people because we needed that many people, and so yeah.
So within the first few months, you had five people.
Oh yeah.
Interesting. And what is the size of the practice now? How many staff?
We're about 12 people.
Okay.
12 staff right now. We've varied. We've been up to 18, 19, 20, but we've come back down again. There's sort of a rule of thumb in terms of how many staff you can have and how many projects and how much involvement you want to have as a partner. And my goal has always been to not become a manager of people, but to practice architecture and be really involved in the design and the detail and all of that. And so it does start to limit the number of projects and number of staff that you can therefore have.
What I can say and I can describe watching you talk about being involved in the architecture and managing people is that you're smiling as you're talking about the involvement in the architecture, because there are some people that are more geared at wanting to, I think in some ways, manage a business and still have their hand in architecture. But then there are those that really, really care and want to be involved in each one of the projects. And based on the smile you just gave, and you continue to give,
yeah.
I can feel that. I can understand that.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, it's a demanding profession, and so to you got to love it.
Yeah.
And you got to be passionate, and I want everyone I work with to be passionate and to love it.
It's also, I think, in residential, far more rewarding in that you're building something for people that is ultimately going to be their dream. And when you're looking at the connection between that architecture and their intent, you get to bring it out of them and develop it for them and make it tangible. This dream becomes something of a reality. And so when you start to look at stone or hardwood and tile and those elements that make up the component of the architecture on the finishing side, it becomes surreal. It's different than like a board of directors or a CEO and a CFO and a COO telling you what their vision is.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what makes it such a fascinating profession, is that you do have that tangibility of what you do. And as you say, the interactions you have with the clients and the satisfaction that they have at the end of the project is something that is just you can't duplicate. And of course, you keep in touch with these clients forever.
Yeah.
I mean, I always say that a house is like a child. It may grow up, but it never fully. You still always care about it.
Right.
I just finished doing a major gut renovation for a client who I'd actually built a cottage for previously, and they just moved in about a month ago, and they called me up and they said, this was transformative. We still can't believe that we're living in this house. We keep pinching ourselves. Our friends have come in and they've just been absolutely blown away. We can't tell you how happy we are. And when you get that kind of feedback, you go, yeah, that's why I'm doing this. Yeah. Yeah.
Did they remember some of the challenges throughout the construction, or was it relatively smooth throughout?
This was actually really smooth. We had a great contractor. They loved the contractor.
I mean, that's amazing.
They were very receptive to ideas. Of course, they get nervous about things and question things, but as long as you're patient and you listen and you give them time to work through things in their heads, then that's all that you need to do.
Well, and I feel like one of the benefits you have in there is that you'd worked with them previously. They've not done this. They've done this before. I should say not done this, but they've done this before. So they become aware of the process.
Yes.
They understand that it can take time. The decisions need to be made. They understand that delays can happen. Whereas the new client that's never done this before, you've got to kind of hold their hand through it all.
That's very true. I mean, there's no way around it. Trying to educate your client about the process and prepare them for that things may not always go smoothly, of course, is one of the big challenges that you've got to learn how to meander through. And then, of course, you're also, as well as being a designer, you also have to be a bit of a therapist at the same time, of course, because sometimes the couple don't always agree with everything. And so it's all about just making sure that everyone feels heard.
Right. Yeah, we deal with that we deal with that regularly, especially when it comes to schedule and budget. Those are the two big things, making sure that people are aware of where that all lands and what it's looking like and the constant update on that, because then you're getting them into that house at the end and they can give you all that feedback and their friends feel it and everyone feels good when they're finally back in there. When you're looking at the overall introduction of the practice to a new prospective client, are you explaining to them at that point that you like to remain heavily involved? And what does it look like from your team's perspective? Like, do you have a project lead or project manager that is leading up the project? And if so, what does that look like for them?
Right. Well, especially with residential projects, most clients are very reassured by knowing that, I'm not just a pretty face that they
Yeah.
meet at the beginning and then I hand it off.
Right.
And so that's always a benefit to be able to
Yeah.
just be very honest with them about that. I mean, depending on the scale of the project, the size of it, it might just be me working with one other staff member.
Mm-hmm.
With some of the larger houses, I need to delegate more, obviously, and I can't be involved in every single decision. But certainly, every time any meeting with the client, I'm always there, and if they ever have an issue, I want them to know that I'm the guy they're going to call.
That's what I've come to notice about any of the leading architects that are practicing long term. They understand the importance and value of that relationship. Those that kind of take a step back from it and allow the staff to run with it and get involved in certain phases, I find that the quality of the product that they're putting out, the connectivity between them, client and contractor, is a little bit more broken. So it's always nice hearing that people stay involved. So, yeah.
But that said, though, I mean, I do want to emphasize that, as an architect, I'm only as good as the people I work with.
Yeah.
And I'm not just saying that, having a really talented staff member to work with you and also contribute ideas just makes the projects that much better. So this sort of myth of the Howard Rourke single architect from Fountainhead who can do it all, of course, is meaningless. It really is truly a collaborative process, and of course, it also needs to be, because you need the people working with you to take ownership as well, and to feel that they are really making a contribution and not just sitting there, doing what they're told.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because otherwise they burn out and they want to leave, right?
Right.
When people feel that they're a part of something and that they are heard, same as the client, right? That they're heard, they feel connected to it. They want to keep that level of integration with you and with the clients. They want to keep that going. They stay where they are most of the time. Have you found that you've run into ever any issues with trying to find the right staff? Because I know that staffing can sometimes be a real plague to this industry.
Well, there was a period of a couple of years ago where there was a real shortage of trying to find the right people, for sure. I think it's kind of coming back a little bit where there's more people who you can find, but for sure there have been some challenges in the past, and a lot of competition, obviously, between different firms to attract the best people.
Definitely,
yeah, because they're worth their weight in gold.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it allows you to sleep at night, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that you've got someone there that can actually fulfill the requirements of the client and the project. And so with the practice, we've talked about people, we've talked about yourself, we've talked about types of projects that you've been involved with. In terms of location, are you bound by any locations with what you do? Where are the majority of your projects, and where are some of the few that you've had that have been very special?
So the majority are in Toronto.
Okay.
But that said, for various reasons, we've had projects in a number of interesting places. Worked on a couple of villas on the island of Anguilla. We were approached by Ciccone Simone, one of the great interior design companies in Toronto. They were looking for an architect to work with them. They had a client to design these villas. So that was one really interesting location. Not long ago, we finished a project in Tuscany near Lucca, which was for a client who we had originally designed a house in Toronto for.
Amazing.
And she decided, after we'd had the permit and torn down the old house, that she decided she didn't want to build a house there for various reasons. But her passion had always been Italy. And so she ended up finding this building that was constructed, the shell of it, to be a spa, just this beautiful, this long 2-story building with arched windows, and so she purchased it, and we worked with her basically from afar to design it and help her, deal with all the trades. And of course, she found someone to help build it. And one of my staff, Marco Bonatti, who's been with us for 16 and a half years, is actually from Italy originally.
Amazing.
And speaks fluent Italian. His family still lives there. And so he was literally, managing this project from Toronto, speaking Italian to everybody.
Yeah.
So that was a great location.
And for him, how special to have had that type of experience, right?
It was fun.
It's not often that you're going to be a Toronto-based firm and get to go speak in your native tongue to your countrymen.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So that was kind of a fun project. And then, of course, not everything's in Toronto. We're doing cottages.
Yep.
In Muskoka and all of that, and out near Hamilton and places like that.
And is there a certain architecture style that really resonates with you, or are you really open to it all?
Well, it's a contemporary aesthetic.
Yep.
I've had in the past potential clients approach me and say, we're looking for an architect, but we want something traditional, but we heard you were really great to work with. And I've just said, my heart's not in it. I can't do it. And just try to direct them elsewhere.
Right.
But there's no question that the clients can often, influence the direction of the aesthetic as long as it's not too traditional. And so, I think some of our projects look quite different than others. We're doing a house near Caledon where the client, who we'd actually already designed and built 2 houses for, came to us. And she said, I have this amazing site. It's 10-acre lot. It's out in the middle of the country. I want to build a long house, just one great long extruded house, and I want it to be out of stone. And so we said, okay, let's start with that. And it's going to have a pitched roof, which we don't do a lot of, but I'm not opposed to them.
Yeah.
But so that was her parameter to start. And then from there, we worked with her and ended up being a long house with a piece sticking out of the side of it, because it just made sense. And then she found these amazing trades who could do this wonderful rubble stone masonry on the outside. And so, our aesthetic obviously is affected by who we're working with.
Right. The idea of the rubble stone is not always so contemporary. So it's interesting that was brought in.
Well, we've been using that on houses for quite a while.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah. The very first house that I mentioned that I did in 2000 had a base of rubble stone, but then the upper part was stucco, very modern, clean planes of stucco.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting to sort of mix the potentially these different kinds of materials, as long as you do it right.
Yes.
So maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will. I have a little pet peeve about certain types of contemporary design that you see in Toronto, and I call it the Mr. Potato Head School of Design, which means I'm going to put this material here, and then I'm going to have another material here, and it's all these things are kind of stuck on the building, the house, and there's no integrity. There's no real sort of thought and idea that goes with that. Right. So it's always about managing the materials, and often, I find you may start with something that's a bit more elaborate, but then I find myself pulling back and saying, well, do we really need this move? Do we really need that move?
Yeah. Why?
How would the house be if it was simpler?
In the projects now, do you feel like you're able to draw on some of the components that you worked on, let's say referencing that first house? Are there components now that you say, what, this still holds true? I want to stick to something like the rubble stone. I'm going to stick to this because it really works. It's timeless. Or do you find that there are supplies and materials now that are really different than what you were working with before that you want to engage with?
The main thing that I've come to really seriously consider is how much wood to use on the outside of a house. So, for instance, that first house had beautiful custom mahogany windows.
Okay.
And they're gorgeous. And it had this beautiful wood screen in front of a 2-story stair. But wood in our climate needs a lot of maintenance.
Yes.
And so But clients still want it, and so I try to be very careful about where I use it. Under soffits, for instance, I'll still
Yep.
use it because it's more protected. But when it comes to using it a lot, I usually do my best to try to dissuade them. So, I mean, the changes that I've found in what I do are more based on the experiences that I've had as
Right.
houses have been finished, and looked at how they wear with time.
Yeah. I guess location is one element of that. The exposure is the other.
Right.
Like a south facing house. You put wood on that south facing house and you put it near a lake,
Right.
it's going to just get destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And okay, so the focus generally is a contemporary. You're at a staff of around 12, which is now kind of been established as your sweet spot in terms of your staffing requirements. And you've been around long enough to have a well-established name, lending itself to getting to work with repeat clients. Are there elements of your profession so far that you have not yet hit in terms of like a goal or a locale that you have not yet built in or designed in? What do you feel is that missing piece that you haven't yet hit?
I have a real interest in the mid-rise typology,
Mm-hmm.
residential typology, because I think it's the right thing for Toronto.
Yeah.
And obviously we're seeing a lot of a move to try to find more housing and all of that.
Yeah.
And I think from an urbanistic point of view, I like that mid-rise typology. Again, I think there's some really interesting things that can be done with it, and I haven't really had the opportunity to work on that. And I haven't stopped thinking that that's something that I would still like to do. Like, I haven't sort of decided all I'm going to do from now on is residential,
Right.
by any means.
Yep.
I mean, we're working on a project right now on Queen Street where we're renovating a heritage building and creating a really amazing interior. So I'm still very much interested in the idea of projects that are make a real contribution to the city.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the projects I'm most proud of, actually, that we did a number of years ago was we did a really big project on Market Street, running between Front Street down to the Esplanade, where we renovated an old building, and it became an LCBO building, and then created all these storefronts sort of as the street slopes down. We built a new a building at the south end that sort of complements but doesn't imitate.
Mm-hmm.
And also worked with the developer to reestablish how the street itself could become part of the overall aesthetic. And we were actually working with landscape architects and the developer. I believe it was the first project where we actually created a curb in Toronto, where a non-existent curb between the sidewalk and the street. And the really interesting thing about this project, for anyone who's been down there, is it was designed so that in the summertime, the sidewalk got wider, and there were bollards that could be moved to widen the sidewalk for outdoor seating. And in the wintertime, the bollards would move back to create a narrower sidewalk, and then you can have parking along there. And the big push for that was also to try to get the street closed, because it makes a lot of sense. And in recent years, they finally started to close the street down at certain times in the summer. So, I mean, that type of project that really contributes to our urban environment, I'm obviously very, very excited to do, and would like to do some more. And in fact, I worked with a visionary developer on that. His name was Paul Oberman. And Paul, unfortunately, died in a plane crash a number of years ago. And I'm very sad, because I think we would have seen a lot more visionary projects from him. He's the guy who started putting up the Christmas tree on the tracks across Yonge Street.
Yeah, Summerhill.
At Summerhill, yeah.
Wow.
And in fact, he's the one who redeveloped the old train station into
Into
the
the LCBO.
LCBO there. So anyway, I'm kind of I was digressing a bit, but
No, that's not a digress.
you had
No,
asked me
that's
about
that's fluid thought.
okay, yeah, yeah. Just about other types of projects that I'm interested in. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the long-winded version of that.
I mean, I to take a little bit of pause as you're saying all of that. First, obviously, I'm sorry to hear about
Paul Oberman.
Paul. Yeah, I mean I lived at Yonge and St. Clair for a period of time in my life, and I used to walk down to that area to the Summerhill LCBO all the time, which is staple and beautiful, just an absolute beautiful building.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of the area that you're talking about down in the Esplanade, and I'm pretty sure that I have a pretty good understanding of where you're describing right now. And the city, to your point, the city needs a lot of that. And mid-rise has been an ongoing conversation for the need of density throughout the whole city. It's a huge thing. This whole area is getting redeveloped. We're here in Leaside, and the communities and what they do to patronize these plans, but then they complain that that their kids can't find homes that are affordable, and yet they're the ones holding back the community from being able to establish this. So to your point, getting into some of the mid-rise stuff would definitely be very interesting. I would be curious to see and I'm gonna follow that journey going forward from here. Are there other areas in the world that you would love to have one of your projects located in that you have not yet touched?
No,
No?
it's not about where the project is. It's more about what the project is and who the client is and all of that. Yeah.
Okay. And so outside of the world of architecture, what does your life look like? Family, what do you do? What do you do to get your mind off of all of this?
Well, that's a good question. I love to travel.
Yeah.
And my husband and I have traveled all over we've been married for 19 years today's our 19th
Today's your anniversary?
wedding anniversary. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a huge milestone.
I know. Yeah. So we have traveled just every year or every 2 years we go on a big trip. Last year it was France. The year before it was Italy. The year before that, I think we had to miss a year because of COVID. Before that, we were in Egypt and Jordan. Before that was Japan and Vietnam. I mean, we love to travel.
Amazing.
And just to visit, these cities or countryside and of course I love going to see the old buildings, the new buildings. 2 years ago in Italy, I had the opportunity to do something I wanted to do for a long time, which was to visit as many projects by Carlo Scarpa as I could. He's a great Italian architect who was just the master of his craft as a designer, and he built new buildings, he renovated buildings, he did a cemetery called the Brione Family Cemetery out in the middle of nowhere in not too far from Verona and all of that, which for anyone who doesn't know it should look up this cemetery. It's just it's a one-of-a-kind masterpiece for this one family. So that's what I love to do is travel. And I mean, I'm always thinking about architecture, so it's I guess, I don't know if it's healthy or not, but that's, even when I travel, it's about visiting all these things. And luckily, my husband James enjoys doing it too.
First of all, I could tell you this: you are not alone in that. Some of the other people I've spoken to, Drew Mandel, same thing. Richard Wengels is the same thing. Travel largely is tied to the architecture, so in some way, finding a way to make it about that. What have been some of the structures? I mean, thinking of Japan, you listed off so many destinations. Was there a favorite place that you saw in Japan that has really stuck with you and that you've tried to bring into anything that you design now?
I'm not going to say it's brought into anything I design now, but we went to an island. There are actually two islands we visited. Let me get it right. Which one is the main one? Naoshima or Teshima? I'm going to say Naoshima is also known as the Art Island.
Okay.
And so it is an island where they've had some great museums built, outdoor installations, outdoor artwork. There's kusama pumpkins, the polka dots that she does. And on the neighboring island of Teshima, I hope I'm getting the right ones, there's a structure that it's kind of hard to describe. It's a great shallow concrete, very, very shallow concrete shell.
I've seen this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you get to the island, you rent bicycles, you go around, visit things, then you come to this great shell. And when you go into this shell, the floor is also just slightly concave, and there's two great cutouts in the upper shell that are just exposed to the to the air. And the incredible thing about the floor is that these little droplets of water emerge out of the floor. You don't see a hole, you see nothing, but somehow they've done something where little droplets of water emerge and then they start to grow and get a little bigger. And so I spent about 35 minutes following one little droplet of water as it grew, and then began to gradually sort of move across the floor.
Yeah.
And then gradually merge with some other pieces of water, and just sort of followed it on its journey. And it was really, it's hard to explain the experience.
The water's percolating up out of
just little droplets of water here and there percolate up very slowly. And you can't wear shoes, so you don't want to walk on the water. And you're asked not to talk, and it's just a transcendent experience. And in one of the great round openings in the shell, there's this little, it's like a gossamer string that has been stretched from one end of the opening to the other. It's so light it almost looks like a spider web. And with the wind, you see it gradually moving a little bit. So everything about that was so subtle.
Yeah.
Nothing was in your face or having to make a point, which in today's age, I think everyone needs constant stimulation.
Yeah.
The big exciting things, you go into these rooms and there's projection on all the walls and the ceilings and everything, and it's stimulation and stimulation. This was the opposite, and it was certainly the high point of the visit to Japan.
I'm pausing because you've described this in such a way that I've seen images, but I've never been there. But I can, through your description, in many ways understand. You think about when you're walking on water. I guess I got to preface, not physically walking on water, but walking on these droplets. And I feel like not potentially everybody is appreciating what's happening in that environment. What is the surface on the ground?
It's concrete.
It's all concrete.
Everything is just an off-white concrete. The floor, the ceiling, if you will, of the shallow shell. The outside of it is also the same color. It was designed by one of the partners at Sanai. I always pronounce it wrong. Sanaa, who are just one of the great Japanese contemporary firms, and it's sort of a little bit like the experience you might have if you went into the Pantheon, except if no one was there.
Right.
And perhaps it was raining and the hole in the ceiling was open. I think it's been closed now. But in a just incredible contemplative way, you could just see all the people. Some people were just sitting and they were just sort of watching the floor. They were looking out, and it was so calm and peaceful there. It just shows how transcendent architecture can be.
It's a very interesting way to have experienced it, right? Especially with the rule of no talking, right?
And no cell phones.
Yeah, that you have to focus on being present and your thoughts and what you are experiencing in not quite the same way, but in some ways, for me, it was a very interesting experience. I was in New York City in 2001 after the bombing, after the planes crashed in. and I was staying just on the opposite side of Times Square. And at 1 o'clock, I think it was 1 o'clock in the morning or 12:30 in the morning, the police emptied the entire square out, and all the cleanup crews, they were all set up to clean up everything. Now I know this isn't quite the exact same thing by any means of the imagination, but I ended up going out of my hotel and walking into Times Square at around 1:15. I was the only person in Times Square, like Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise. And so to your point, like at that time, I didn't have a cell phone. You're walking through, now you have all the signs, but there's nothing. And it was quiet in the middle of Times Square. Never in my life, you have to, what kind of a budget you'd have to pay for to empty Times Square for Vanilla Sky. But the experience of being in a place like that, for me, different. Again, not even close to the same thing, but in some ways the same thing. You just get to experience where you are and what it is, and the impact that it has on you, that you get to take home with you and try in some ways to bring out in what you do.
I think there's a similar experience down at the World Trade Center with the monument that was created, that void.
Yes.
You see people, they're just standing there looking at it, and they're experiencing it in a way that can't be duplicated. Yeah.
But that's, I mean, to me, part of the reason why when we talked about doing this podcast, one of the exciting elements of it was being able to speak to people that are creating the world we live in. There is an idea that comes out of your head that gets implemented, and now you drive down the street and someone sees what you designed that was an idea.
And there's one project that I'm actually really, really fond of, which was an addition at a school at West Prep that we did a couple of years ago for the Toronto District School Board, just to your point. And we designed it was supposed to be an addition to an existing gymnasium. So we designed a nice addition, and then we had the cost consultants do a costing, and it was way over budget. And so I was like, oh no, what are we going to do here? And it had some interesting moves and all of that. And I realized that we were going to have to just really rethink our whole approach. What could we do? So we just said, okay, we're going to build a box, just a clean box. But what we did with the box was we created this sort of random organization of punched windows at different heights and different sizes. And then we just used a simple idea of breaking up the windows into certain different size mullions, different size panes of glass. And then in some of the panes of glass, we used a colored window film. And we used different window films. And then we painted the inside frames of these boxes from within some different colors. And what I hadn't thought about was that when the sun shines in, that the colored glass would then create these colored patterns on the floor.
On the floor, yeah.
And the principal called me up after it was finished. And he said, the kids love this space. They call it the rainbow room. And so, I mean, the moral is that you don't have to spend tons of money and make lots of moves. Yeah. You just have to have a really strong idea that's going to evoke, ideally, a feeling and a reaction from the people who use it.
Yeah, I'm taking it in. I really am taking it in. I've really found this like so enlightening. It's been such an engaging conversation. I've learned a lot about you. Learned a lot about the practice. I become very contemplative after having these discussions, and I try to think about what are the different things that we can do or I can do personally in my own life to improve based on these conversations. And I think one of them is to spend less time on my cell phone and spend more time in the present. So I would say to you, I really appreciate and thank you for the time. It has been very, very rewarding. I thank you for it. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and look forward to following the journey and looking at the renderings of what will hopefully be soon to be a mid-rise project.
Well, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.